In the shadowed cradle of the winter pines, where the moon's silver tears froze into thorns, and Omega's visions bled into the wind like unspoken oaths, Ilara stumbled through the blizzard's embrace, her bare feet numb against the jagged crust of snow that bit like the teeth of forsaken wolves. The rejection still echoed in her bones, a guttural decree from the alpha of her pack. His eyes cold as the iron chains that had bound her wrists hours before. "Witch!" he had snarled, his voice a thunderclap in the great hall, where the fire's glow had painted the faces of her kin in flickering accusation. She was no witch, only a seer, whose dreams twisted the veil between worlds, revealing truths they feared more than the encroaching war. But fear bred betrayal. And in the dead of night, they had dragged her to the forest's edge, stripping her of her furs, her name, her place among the living. The wind howled now, a mournful dirge that whipped her raven hair across her face, stinging like salt in wounds she could no longer feel. She clutched the silver locket at her throat, the only remnant of her mother's grace, a crescent moon etched into its surface, cool against her fevered skin. Inside, a lock of hair stained with old blood, a talisman against the visions that had always set her apart. It had been her secret anchor through the long winters, when the pack's howls celebrated hunts and matings, while she lay awake, haunted by glimpses of battles yet to come. Rivers of crimson staining white fields, alphas falling like ancient oaks under a blood moon. Exile was no swift death. It was this slow unraveling, the cold seeping into her marrow, promising a quiet surrender to the frost. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks crowned in eternal ice, guardians of secrets older than the packs themselves. Legends whispered of hidden caverns there, temples to the goddess where the rejected might find solace or madness. Ilara had no strength left to seek them. Her breath came in ragged gasps, visible puffs that dissolved into the night like her fading hope. The pack's distant weavos faded behind her, replaced by the crunch of her steps, each one a defiance against the pull of despair. She collapsed against a gnarled pine, its bark rough and unyielding, scraping her palms as she slid to the snow. The world blurred through tears that froze on her lashes. Why her? The goddess had cursed her with sight, yet offered no mercy. In her visions she had seen the pack's doom, a rival horde sweeping from the eastern plains, their alpha a shadow of fury, outnumbering the defenders 3-1. She had warned them, her words tumbling out in the council fire's light, but they twisted her prophecy into treason. "The Seer brings ill omens," the alpha had declared, his mate's jealous glare sealing Ilara's fate. Banished to die alone, her gift deemed a poison rather than a shield. The locket warmed faintly against her chest, as if stirred by her anguish. She pried it open with trembling fingers, the bloodied strand catching the moonlight's pale gleam. Memories flooded her, her mother's voice, soft as falling snow, reciting the old rites. "The moon sees all wounds, daughter, even those carved by kin." But what good was sight when it blinded her to her own survival? The cold clawed deeper, numbing her limbs, and she curled into herself, the wind's lament the only companion to her solitude. In that fragile hush, a distant crack echoed through the trees, not the snap of branches under snow, but something heavier, deliberate. Ilara's head lifted, her seer's instincts prickling despite the exhaustion. Shadows danced at the tree line, forms too purposeful for beasts. Warriors, the pack returning to finish what the storm had not? Her heart pounded, a wild drum against the silence, as she pressed deeper into the pine's shadow. The air thickened with the scent of pine resin and something metallic. Blood, fresh and sharp, carried on the gale. From the gloom emerged a lone figure, staggering like a wounded stag, his broad shoulders hunched against the onslaught. He was clad in ragged furs, dark with frost and ichor, a massive sword slung across his back, glinting under the moon's indifferent watch. No ordinary wanderer, his presence commanded the night, even in defeat. An alpha, she knew instinctively, his aura a storm of restrained power that made the air hum. But this one bore no pack's arrogance. His steps faltered, breath labored, as if the weight of unseen chains dragged him down. He paused, scenting the air, his head turning toward her hiding place. Golden eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, pierced the darkness. Ilara froze, the locket pulsing like a second heartbeat. Fear coiled in her gut, mingling with an unwelcome curiosity. Who was he, this intruder in her exile? A scout from the rival horde, come to claim the borderlands? Or something more, a harbinger of the visions that had condemned her? The Alpha dropped to one knee in the snow, a low growl escaping his lips, not of threat, but pain. Blood trickled from a gash on his arm, staining the white ground in dark rivulets that steamed faintly in the cold. He was marked not just by battle, but by something deeper, a guilt that shadowed his gaze like storm clouds over the moon. Ilara's breath caught. In her dreams, she had seen such eyes before, belonging to kings who led armies to ruin, their hearts heavy with the ghosts of choices unmade. She should flee, vanish into the blizzard's maw. Yet the locket burned hotter, its lunar curve a silent command. The wind whispered secrets, carrying the faint echo of rivos from afar, pursuers closing in. He was hunted as she was. In that shared fragility, beneath the frost-kissed moon, the first thread of an unlikely tether began to weave itself, fragile as a spider's silk in the gale. The Alpha's golden eyes locked onto hers through the veil of swirling snow, a predator's gaze softened by the raw edge of vulnerability. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning the wind's ceaseless wail as she shrank deeper into the pine's shadow. He was no mere scout. The scars etched across his exposed forearm told tales of battles won and lost, each line a map of regrets carved by claw and blade. Blood dripped from his wound, pooling in the snow like spilled ink from a forbidden scroll, and the metallic tang invaded her senses, sharp as the betrayal that had driven her here. She should run. The instinct clawed at her, primal and unyielding, urging her to melt into the blizzard's anonymity. Omegas like her did not court alphas, especially not ones who carried the scent of command and carnage. Yet her feet remained rooted, the locket at her throat thrumming with an unnatural warmth, as if the moon itself urged her forward. Curiosity, that treacherous whisper, coiled around her fear. What wounds did this stranger bear that mirrored her own exile? His breath came in heavy gusts, visible clouds that hung in the frigid air, and for a moment he seemed less a king of the wilds and more a man adrift, haunted by shadows only he could see. With a labored grunt, he pushed himself upright, his massive frame swaying like an ancient oak battered by the gale. The sword at his back shifted, its hilt wrapped in worn leather that spoke of countless grips in the heat of fray. He took a step toward her hiding place, not with aggression, but with the deliberate caution of one who knew pursuit nipped at his heels. "Show yourself," his voice rumbled, low and gravel-rough, laced with the authority of thrones long contested. It was a command, yet threaded with weariness, as if issuing orders had become a burden rather than a birthright. Ilara's hand tightened around the locket, the crescent moon pressing into her palm like a brand. The visions flickered at the edges of her mind, fragments of armored hordes clashing under a crimson sky, the Alpha's face twisted in defeat amid the fallen. Was this him? The Seer in her recoiled, denying the pull, rationalizing it as delirium born of the cold. He was danger incarnate, a fugitive Alpha whose very presence could drag her deeper into the abyss. But the wind carried his scent now, pine smoke and iron resolve, mingled with the faint underlying musk of sorrow, and it stirred something dormant within her, a reluctant empathy that bloomed like frost flowers on barren stone. She emerged slowly, her ragged shift clinging to her skin like a shroud, the snow crunching beneath her bare feet. His eyes widened fractionally, surprise flickering across features hardened by years of war. An omega, alone and unmarked by any pack's claim in the heart of the border wilds. "You," he murmured, more to himself than to her, his gaze tracing the locket's gleam before returning to her face. There was no leer, no possessive hunger, only a guarded assessment, as if she were a puzzle etched in moonlight, both enigma and potential snare. "I mean no harm," Ilara said, her voice barely above the storm's murmur, though doubt laced every syllable. Harm was all she knew from Alphas, their decrees that shattered lives, their fears that turned kin to enemies. She stepped back instinctively as he closed the distance, his wound leaving a crimson trail that the snow eagerly drank. Up close, he towered over her, his breath warm against the chill, carrying the faint spice of hearth fires long extinguished. Guilt shadowed his expression, a melancholy veil that made his golden eyes seem almost human, stripped of their feral edge. "Nor I," he replied, though his tone held the weight of unspoken oaths. "But the night hunts us both." He glanced over his shoulder, where the distant weavos pierced the veil, his pursuers, relentless as the tide. Ilara followed his gaze, her seer's sight sharpening the shadows into forms, rival warriors, their banners snapping like vengeful ghosts. The connection sparked then, instinctive and unwelcome, a thread of shared peril weaving between them. She saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, not of matehood, but of mutual exile, the outcast and the fallen king, bound by the moon's indifferent witness. He extended a hand, not to claim, but to steady himself against the pine, his fingers brushing the bark mere inches from hers. The air between them thickened, charged with the unspoken. "Thorn," he said simply, offering his name like a gauntlet thrown into the snow. No titles, no boasts, just the raw truth of a man unmoored. Ilara hesitated, the locket's heat a reminder of her mother's warning. Trust was a blade that cut both ways. "Ilara," she whispered finally, the word tasting of ash and defiance. Fear warred with curiosity in her chest, rationalizing the draw as survival's cruel jest. An alpha like him could crush her with a thought, yet in his gaze she glimpsed a mirror to her own fractured soul, guilt for visions unheeded, duty twisted into chains. The weavos grew nearer, a chorus of malice echoing off the mountains. Thorn's jaw tightened, his free hand drifting toward his sword. "They come for me, for the blood on my hands." His voice cracked, revealing the ethical core beneath the warrior's shell. The melancholy of a king who had led his army into outnumbered slaughter, only to flee the ruins. Ilara's visions surged, unbidden. Fields of white turned red. Tactics whispered in the dark that could turn the tide. She pushed it down, denying the bond forming in the silence, born not of desire, but of this fragile intersection of fates. In that suspended breath, as the storm raged and the moon cast its silver judgment, the first denial took root. She turned from him toward the deeper woods, but his quiet plea halted her. "Wait." The word hung, heavy as fresh-fallen snow, curiosity pulling her back despite the fear's iron grip. They were strangers, yet the night conspired to entwine them, the locket pulsing like a shared heartbeat against the encroaching dark. "And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you." The blizzard's fury masked their flight, a white veil drawn by the moon's capricious hand as Ilara and Thorn plunged deeper into the shadowed throat of the mountains. Her bare feet bled into the snow, each step a crimson punctuation against the endless drift. But she felt no pain, only the urgent rhythm of survival sinking with his labored breaths beside her. The locket bounced against her chest, its warmth a defiant spark amid the encroaching freeze, as if the blood within whispered of alliances forged in desperation. Thorn's hand grazed her arm once, not in possession, but in guidance, steering her toward a jagged outcrop where the pines huddled like silent sentinels. Behind them the Weavos swelled, a savage symphony slicing through the gale, pursuers from his fractured horde, or perhaps the rival clan's vanguard, drawn by the scent of spilled alpha blood. Thorn's wound wept steadily, staining his furs in dark blooms that the snow failed to conceal, yet he moved with the grim resolve of one who had stared down worse abysses. "This way," he growled, his voice a low thunder that cut through the wind's wail, golden eyes scanning the terrain with the precision of a tactician mapping defeat. Elara nodded, her raven hair plastered to her face like frozen rivers, curiosity now laced with a reluctant trust. He was no savior, this exiled king. His guilt hung heavy, a shadow that made his every glance a confession unspoken. They crested a ridge, the world dropping away into a ravine where ice-crusted boulders formed a natural bastion. Thorn vaulted down first, landing with a muffled crunch, then turned to catch her as she slipped, his grip firm yet yielding, calloused fingers brushing her waist. For a heartbeat, the contact ignited something primal, a flicker of heat in the void, denied swiftly by the chill of reason. She was no mate to claim, no prize for his redemption. She was exile, as he was fugitive, their paths crossing in the moon's indifferent weave. "The cavern," he said, pointing to a yawning moor in the rock face, veiled by icicles like the fangs of some ancient beast. "It shields from the storm, and them." Elara followed, the wind's howl fading to a muffled roar as they ducked inside. The air within was stale, thick with the mineral tang of stone and forgotten earth, lit faintly by shafts of moonlight piercing the ceiling's fractures. She sank against the wall, her body trembling not just from cold, but from the adrenaline's ebb, the locket's pulse sinking with her racing heart. Thorn paced the narrow space, his massive frame filling it like a storm caged, drawing his sword with a whisper of steel on leather. The blade gleamed dully, etched with runes of old oaths, symbols of a crown he wore like a noose. "They'll track the blood," he murmured, more to the shadows than to her, his melancholy voice echoing the weight of commands that had led his army to the brink. Outnumbered on the eastern plains, his warriors cut down like wheat before the scythe, all because he had chosen mercy over slaughter in a parley gone sour. Guilt carved deeper than any claw, he had fled not as coward, but as the last guardian of a dying legacy. She watched him, empathy stirring unbidden, a fragile bloom in the frost of her isolation. His eyes, those golden depths, held the same fracture she knew, the rejection of kin, the burden of sight unvalued. "Why do they hunt you?" she asked, her voice soft as falling ash, wrapping her arms around herself against the cavern's bite. The question hung, intimate in the dimness, pulling at the thread between them. Thorn paused, sheathing his sword with deliberate care, as if the act grounded his unraveling. He slid down beside her, far enough to honor the space her fear demanded, yet close enough that his warmth seeped through the chill like a hearth's promise. "My horde, my people," he began, the words tasting of blood and regret. "We held the border passes against the Iron Fang clan. They outnumber us threefold, their alpha a tyrant who devours packs whole. I sought peace, offered terms under the moon's truce, but betrayal—" His fist clenched, knuckles whitening. "One of my betas sold us out, whispering their tactics to the enemy. The battle turned to massacre. I fought, but too many fell because I hesitated. Now they call me Oathbreaker, and the survivors hunt to reclaim what honor I stole." Elara's breath caught, the locket warming as visions teased the edges of her mind. Flashes of banners clashing, snow churned to mud and gore, a king's silhouette amid the fallen. She pushed them back, rationalizing the pull as shared sorrow, not destiny's hook. Yet, in his confession, she saw her own exile mirrored, warnings dismissed, gifts twisted to curses. The cavern trembled faintly, distant echoes of pursuit filtering through, boots on ice, low snarls like the grind of grinding teeth. Thorn tensed, rising to block the entrance, his body a shield of muscle and scars. "Stay behind," he ordered, ethical command laced with melancholy, as if protecting her was atonement for those he could not save. She rose too, defiance sparking in her veins. No longer the passive seer, banished and broken. Here, in this stone womb, vulnerability forged alliance. A shadow loomed at the mouth, 3 figures, cloaked in rival furs, eyes gleaming with feral hunger. The first lunged, axe raised, but Thorn met him with a roar that shook the icicles loose, his sword clashing in a spray of sparks. Blood arced, hot and metallic, splattering the wall near Ilara's face, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold. She scrambled for a loose stone, hurling it with desperate accuracy, cracking the second assailant's knee. He howled, tumbling into the snow, buying Thorn a moment to dispatch the first with a precise thrust, mercy denied in the heat of necessity. The third hesitated, scenting the shift, not one wounded alpha, but 2 souls entwined in defiance. Thorn advanced, blade dripping, his golden eyes burning with restrained fury. "Go!" he snarled, voice a vow of retribution held in check. The warrior fled, Weavos trailing into the night like defeated echoes. Panting, Thorn turned to her, surprise softening his features. "You fought," he said, almost in wonder, wiping blood from his cheek. His own mingled with the enemy's. Ilara met his gaze, the locket's heat spreading through her like liquid fire, empathy deepening into something irrevocable, a bond born of blood and shared breath. "We both did," she replied, the words a quiet revelation, fear yielding to the warmth of mutual guard. In that moment, as moonlight filtered in like a benediction, the cavern felt less like refuge and more like crucible, their wounds exposed, yet mending in the silence. But the visions stirred stronger now, unbidden whispers of tactics that could invert the tide, turning prey to predators. She denied them still, clinging to the fragile denial of what this union might demand. Outside, the storm renewed its assault, but within, the air hummed with unspoken possibility, the moon bearing witness to the first true tether. Not love, but the raw proof of redemption's cost. The moonlight fractured through the cavern's jagged ceiling like splintered prophecies, casting ethereal webs across the blood-streaked stone where Ilara and Thorn had taken their stand. The air hung heavy with the coppery reek of fresh slaughter, mingling with the damp earthiness of the rock, a visceral reminder that survival was no gentle grace, but a blade's cold kiss. Ilara's hands trembled as she wiped the enemy's blood from her cheek, the warmth of it stark against her chilled skin, a fleeting fire that echoed the locket's insistent pulse at her throat. She had fought, not as a seer lost in visions, but as a woman reclaiming the fragments of her shattered will. Yet now, in the aftermath's hush, the denied whispers clawed free, visions uncoiling like smoke from a hidden pyre. Thorn sheathed his sword with a deliberate rasp, the sound slicing the tension like a vow etched in steel. His golden eyes, still alight with the fray's embers, fixed on her, not with the conqueror's claim, but a deepening scrutiny that peeled back her defenses layer by layer. Blood matted his furs, his wound reopened and seeping anew. Yet he stood unbowed, the melancholy king whose ethical core refused surrender even in exile. "You see more than the shadows," he said, his voice a low rumble, resonant with the weight of unspoken burdens. It was no question, but an acknowledgement, drawn from the way her gaze had sharpened during the clash, anticipating the assailant's feint before it struck. Ilara turned from him, pressing her back to the cold wall, the stone's bite grounding her against the surge within. The locket burned hotter now, its crescent moon a brand against her flesh. the bloodied lock of hair inside stirring as if alive with her mother's ancient rites. She had always rationalized her gift as curse, a veil-rending sight that invited rejection rather than reverence. In the pack's hall, under the fire's accusing flicker, her warnings of the Iron Fang horde's advance had been met with snarls and exile, her visions deemed omens of doom, not beacons of salvation. But here, in this womb of ice and shadow, denial fractured like the icicles above. The wind outside moaned through the entrance, carrying distant weavos that twisted into shapes, armies massing on frozen plains, Thorn's outnumbered horde crumbling under relentless assault. "I see. Fragments," she admitted, her words tasting of frost and reluctance, each syllable a concession wrested from fear. She slid down the wall, knees drawn to her chest, the cavern's chill seeping into her bones like doubt's insidious creep. The visions bloomed unbidden, vivid as fresh spilled blood under the moon. The eastern border, where white fields stretched like a blank scroll awaiting inscription. Thorn's warriors, ragged and few, faced the Iron Fang's tide, 3-1, their banners of iron claws snapping in the gale. But in the haze, a tactic whispered, born of the land's own secrets, luring the enemy into the ravine's hidden moors, where avalanches could be loosed like the goddess's judgment, turning bulk into burial, predators into prey, buried beneath tons of eternal ice. Thorn knelt before her, close enough that his warmth breached the gulf, his scent of pine smoke and iron resolve wrapping around her like an unwanted cloak. Guilt shadowed his features, etching lines deeper than any scar, the fallen king who had chosen parley over preemptive strike, mercy over massacre, only to watch his betas betray him and his army bleed out on the snow. "Fragments of what?" he pressed, his tone compassionate yet insistent, the ethical alpha seeking truth not for dominance, but for the redemption that eluded him. His hand hovered near hers, not touching, honoring the boundary her fear demanded, yet the air between them hummed with lunar tension, the moon's silver light gilding his eyes like a crown of thorns. The locket's heat crested, a fever that blurred the cavern's edges, and Ilara's vision sharpened into clarity, a revelation that tore through her like the wind's savage howl. She gasped, clutching the silver curve, the blood within seeming to pulse in rhythm with the earth's hidden fury. "The battle," she whispered, eyes distant, a voice threading the ethereal with the visceral. "Your horde. They charge blindly, but the mountains hold the key. The ravines, narrow throats of stone veiled by mist and snow. Draw them in, feign retreat along the false pass. Then, with torches and cries, trigger the slides. The Iron Fang's numbers become their grave. The snow will swallow them whole, leaving your warriors to strike from the heights like shadows of the moon." Thorn's breath stilled, his golden gaze widening as the words sank in, recognition dawning like the first crack of dawn on frost-kissed peaks. He had mapped those lands for seasons, led drills under blood moons, yet this tactic eluded him, subtle, merciless in its elegance, a pathfinder's whisper turning desperation to dominion. "How?" he murmured, not in doubt but awe, the melancholy lifting fractionally as destiny's thread revealed itself. She was no mere exile, this Omega with raven hair and haunted eyes. She was the seer of old tales, the goddess's vessel, her gift the key to inverting his fall. Guilt warred with hope in his chest, the ethical weight of unleashing such destruction, even on tyrants, clashing with the duty to save his kin. Yet in her he glimpsed redemption's form, not conquest, but the moral choice to wield sight for healing wounds, long festered. Ilara recoiled from the intensity of his stare, the vision's afterglow leaving her raw, exposed as a nerve beneath the moon's unyielding gaze. The locket cooled slowly, its warmth ebbing like a tide, but the bond it forged lingered, resisted yet undeniable. She rationalized it still, survival's alliance, not fate's cruel jest. Yet the empathy deepened, her rejection scars mirroring his guilt's abyss. "It's just what I see," she said, voice fracturing, turning her face to the shadows where moonlight pooled like spilled mercury. But Thorn reached out then, his fingers brushing the locket's edge, a touch light as falling snow, igniting a spark that traversed her veins. "No," he said softly, his voice a vow woven with sorrow. "It's the path we were meant to walk. You are the key, Ilara, the whisper that turns prey to predators." The cavern trembled faintly, as if the mountains themselves affirmed the revelation, distant rumbles echoing the avalanches yet to come. Outside, the storm's fury redoubled, wind lashing like the hounds of destiny. But within, a spiritual hush descended, the moon bearing witness to the unfolding. Ilara's heart pounded, a dilemma blooming in the silence. To embrace this gift, to bind her fate to his, meant risking the very rejection that had broken her, or denying it and dooming them both to the cold's eternal embrace. Strength, she thought, was not in claws or crowns, but in choosing to illuminate the dark, even when it burned. In that suspended breath, as blood dried to rust on the stone and the locket gleamed like a promise, Thorn's hand withdrew, leaving the air charged with possibility's fragile fire. The seer's gift had manifested, not as curse, but as the thread of rebirth, weaving their wounds into something transcendent. Yet the ethical precipice loomed, mercy or strategy, love's proof or war's demand. And Ilara wondered in the moon's compassionate light if redemption could crown even those who whispered of graves. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The dawn's pale fingers clawed through the cavern's fractures, bleeding silver light into the blood-crusted hollow where Ilara and Thorn had forged their uneasy vigil. The storm had ebbed to a sullen whisper, leaving the world outside swathed in crystalline hush. But the air within thrummed with the aftershocks of revelation, visions that had spilled from her lips like forbidden wine, turning the seer's curse into a weapon's edge. Ilara's fingers traced the locket's crescent curve, its warmth now a steady ember against her skin, the bloodied lock inside a silent sentinel to the truths it had unlocked. She felt exposed, raw as flayed hide under the moon's lingering gaze, her gift no longer a solitary burden, but a bridge to the Alpha whose golden eyes now held her with a gravity she could not deny. Thorn rose first, his silhouette cutting sharp against the paling light, muscles coiling like a wolf rousing from winter's grip. The wound on his arm had crusted over, a jagged scar mirroring the deeper fissures of his guilt, but resolve hardened his features, the ethical king weighing the tactic she had whispered, mercy's shadow clashing with war's inexorable call. "We cannot linger," he said, his voice a gravel-low cadence that resonated through the stone, carrying the melancholy of thrones abandoned. "The iron fang draws closer, my hoard fractures without me, but your sight, it changes the board." He extended a hand, not in command but invitation, palm scarred and open, honoring the fragile autonomy she clung to amid the fear. Ilara hesitated, the cavern's chill seeping into her doubt like frost through cracks. To follow him meant entanglement, her exile's freedom traded for the chaos of his redemption. Love's proof a chain she rationalized as mere alliance, yet the locket pulsed, urging her forward, and she placed her hand in his. The contact a spark that traversed her veins, warm and unwelcome. His grip was steady, calloused fingers enveloping hers without possession, a tether born of shared wounds rather than fate's decree. They emerged into the ravine's throat, the snowdrifts gleaming like polished marble under the rising moon's echo, wind sighing through the pines as if mourning the choices yet to come. The mountains unfolded in jagged majesty, their peaks clawing at the bruised sky, but the path twisted toward confrontation's moor, the eastern border where Thorn's past waited like a predator in the mist. Distant uivos pierced the air, Not the rival's triumphant bay, but the fractured cries of his own pack, loyalty splintered by betrayal. Ilara's visions flickered at the edges, sharpening into harbingers. The traitor Beta, his eyes sly as a serpent's, whispering secrets to the Iron Fang Alpha under a truce fire's false glow. She pushed them down, focusing on the crunch of snow beneath their boots, the metallic tang of Thorn's blood mingling with pine resin on the breeze. Freedom whispered of retreat, of vanishing into the wilds where her gift could wither unseen. But his presence pulled, a moral gravity demanding she choose. Forgive the pacts that had scarred them, or ignite the war that might heal through fire. They crested a ridge as twilight bled into the horizon. The plain below, a vast white canvas scarred by the battle's remnants, frozen banners, limp in the wind, dark stains where warriors had fallen like autumn leaves. Thorn's horde had rallied here, a ragged line of 200 against the Iron Fang's 600, their fires sputtering like dying stars. But now, shadows stirred, scouts from both sides, eyes glinting in the half-light. A figure broke from the tree line, cloaked in Thorn's own colors, yet his stride reeked of deceit. The Beta traitor, face gaunt and twisted by ambition, flanked by two loyalists whose gazes wavered between fear and fury. "Thorn!" the Beta snarled, voice cracking like thin ice, his hand on a dagger's hilt as he halted paces away. The wind whipped his furs, carrying the scent of smoke and treachery, and Ilara's locket burned, visions crashing over her, this man's whispers in the enemy's ear, maps traded for promises of power, the parley's mercy shattered into massacre. Thorn stepped forward, shielding her instinctively, his sword half-drawn, golden eyes stormy with the weight of ethical betrayal. "Kyle," he rumbled, the name a wound reopened, melancholy threading his tone like veins of ore in stone. "You sold us for scraps. My hesitation was mercy, yours was cowardice." Kyle's laugh was bitter, echoing off the snow like a curse, his eyes flicking to Ilara with predatory curiosity, the unmarked Omega at the fallen king's side, her locket catching the light like a taunt from the goddess. "Mercy? It was weakness, brother. The Iron Fang Alpha offers strength, packs united under iron rule, no more exiles or seers spinning doom." He gestured to the plain, where distant silhouettes massed. The rival horde, their alpha a hulking shadow atop a war steed, banners of claw and fang snapping like vengeful spirits. Weavos rose in challenge, a chorus that drowned the wind, blood's promise thick in the air. Ilara's heart thundered, the locket's heat a fever as the moral precipice yawned. The visions demanded voice, the ravine's tactic, a path to turn the tide, predators buried in their own avalanche of greed. But to speak was to bind herself to war's red harvest, to Thorn's side over her hard-won solitude. Freedom tempted, a siren's call to slip away into the night, leaving packs to their self-made graves. Forgiveness seemed folly, a balm for wounds too deep. Yet in Thorn's stance, broad shoulders taut against the onslaught, she saw her own rejection mirrored. The pack's haul, the Alpha's decree stripping her bare. Empathy surged, tragic and tender, rationalizing the pull as duty's echo, not love's insidious bloom. The rival Alpha's forces crested the far ridge then, a tide of steel and fury, hooves churning snow to slurry, their leader's roar a thunderclap that shook the ground. Kyle smirked, drawing his blade. "Join or die, Thorn, the Seer witch changes nothing." But Thorn's gaze met Ilara's over his shoulder, a silent plea woven with guilt, the choice his to make, yet hers to illuminate. "Tell them," he murmured, voice low amid the rising din, ethical resolve cracking under the burden, "or we fall as we are." The clash erupted in visceral chaos, blades singing through the air, blood spraying hot against the cold, Weavos mingling with screams as Thorn's loyalists surged from the flanks. Kale lunged, dagger flashing, but Thorn parried with a growl that vibrated the snow. Their duel a whirlwind of steel and betrayal. Ilara backed toward the ridge's edge, the locket clutched like a lifeline, visions screaming for release. The iron fang closed, their alpha's eyes locking on her, a seer, ripe for chains or slaughter. Freedom or war. Forgiveness, a luxury for the unbroken. Her lips parted, the words forming like blood on the tongue. The tactic, the ravines, the turning. But doubt clawed. Would this redemption crown him or drag her into the abyss? As Thorn staggered under Kale's strike, a gash blooming red across his chest, the choice crystallized in the moon's rising judgment. Love as proof demanded sacrifice, not surrender. She stepped forward, voice rising above the fray, a whisper that cut like lunar fire. The false pass, lure them in. The words unleashed. The moral die cast, turning exile's silence to war's clarion. In that heartbeat, as blood painted the snow and the mountains rumbled in distant accord, Ilara felt the tether snap taut. Freedom yielded to compassion's blade, forgiveness deferred for the war that might yet redeem. Thorn glanced back, golden eyes alight with fierce gratitude. The bond no longer denied but embraced in the storm's heart. Yet the ethical shadow lingered. Had she chosen rightly, or merely traded one chain for another's forge? The battle raged, a symphony of fire and frost, leaving the soul's true judgment to the moon's unblinking vigil. The snow churned to crimson slurry beneath the clash of steel and claw. The eastern plain, a vast altar, where the moon's silver gaze judged the unfolding carnage. Ilara's voice still echoed in the gale, the whispered tactic rippling through Thorn's horde like a lunar incantation. Lure the Iron Fang into the false pass, where the mountain's hidden fury waited to claim them. Her heart hammered against the locket's unyielding curve, the bloodied lock within pulsing as if it drank the chaos. Her seer's gift no longer a veiled curse, but a blade unsheathed, carving paths through the frostbound night. She had chosen, in that visceral instant, not freedom's solitary chill, but the fire of union's proof. Compassion over exile, war's redemption over the silence that had once defined her wounds. Thorn fought like a tempest incarnate, his sword a arc of shadowed fury amid the fray, golden eyes flashing with the ethical blaze of a king reborn. Kyle's betrayal had gashed him deep, blood seeping from his chest in hot rivulets that stained the snow like spilled prophecies. Yet he pressed on, his roars weaving commands that turned his outnumbered warriors from prey to predators. "The ravines! Draw them!" he bellowed, voice thunderous over the din, his glance finding Ilara through the melee, a tether of gratitude and something deeper, resisted no longer. She stood at the ridge's lip, wind whipping her raven hair like banners of defiance, the locket's warmth spreading through her veins, a balm against the rejection's ghost that clawed at her resolve. Love was no gentle reward here. It was this raw sacrament, born in blood and choice, healing the fractures of guilt and banishment through shared sacrifice. The Iron Fang horde surged, a relentless tide of iron-armored brutes and snarling wolves, their alpha, a colossus of shadowed muscle astride his steed, eyes burning with tyrannical hunger. 3-1 they had come to devour. But Thorn's betas, loyal remnants forged in the crucible of his mercy, feigned retreat, luring the vanguard toward the narrow throat of the false pass. Ilara's visions had mapped it true, mist-shrouded flanks where snow clung precarious to sheer drops, the earth's bones primed to unleash. She clutched the locket, its crescent moon gleaming like a vow under the rising orb, the metallic tang of blood thick on her tongue, mingling with the pine-sharp bite of the wind. Her bare feet rooted in the crimson slush, numb yet alive, every sense alight with the battle's visceral poetry, the clash of antlers on shields, the wet rip of flesh, Uivos twisting into agonized howls as the trap sprang. torches flared along the heights, Thorn's warriors igniting signal pyres that cast dancing shadows over the chaos, their cries a ritual chorus invoking the goddess's judgment. The mountains responded, a low rumble building like the growl of an ancient beast roused from slumber. Avalanches thundered down, walls of white and stone cascading into the pass, swallowing the Iron Fang's front ranks in a burial roar that drowned the screams. Horses reared, warriors tumbled into the abyss, the tyrant's forces fracturing as panic seeded their ranks. Bulk turned to vulnerability, numbers to graves. From the ridges, Thorn's archers loosed arrows like lunar shafts, picking off the stragglers amid the settling roar, turning the tide with merciless precision. Ilara watched, breath ragged, as Kale broke from the duel, his face a mask of crumbling ambition, dagger slick with Thorn's blood. He lunged toward her, eyes wild with the desperation of the exposed traitor, but Thorn intercepted, his blade a blur that ended the betrayal in a spray of arterial warmth. Kyle crumpled, gaze dimming on the snow, his final whisper lost to the wind, a hollow echo of the pack's old fears. Thorn staggered, pressing a hand to his wound, but his eyes sought hers across the bloodied field, the melancholy king transformed, guilt's chains fracturing under redemption's weight. "You saw it true," he rasped, voice threading the din like a sacred oath, stepping through the fallen to reach her side. She met him there, amid the settling dust and steam of buried foes, her hand finding his, despite the fear's lingering echo, the rational denial that had once armored her heart, now yielding to the bond's inexorable pull. The locket cooled against her skin, its heat spent in the vision's fulfillment, yet the blood within lingered as symbol of wounds transmuted, her mother's legacy, her exile's scar, now woven into his healing. The rival Alpha bellowed defiance from the plain's far edge, his horde halved and reeling. But Thorn raised his sword, the ethical core shining through the gore. Victory not in slaughter's excess, but in the moral choice to spare the routed, offering truce under the moon's witness. "Enough," he called, voice carrying like a decree from forgotten thrones. And the Iron Fang faltered, their tyrant's roar silenced by the avalanche's echo. As the battle ebbed to fractured silence, warriors from both sides lowering weapons in wary awe, Ilara felt the Renascimento stir within, a rebirth not of crowns or claims, but of souls entwined. Thorn's arm encircled her, gentle against the chill, his warmth seeping through her shift like dawn's first promise, the scent of blood and pine binding them in tragic tenderness. "We choose this," he murmured, golden eyes soft with the sorrow of losses endured, yet alight with the spiritual fire of destiny embraced. No immediate blaze of passion. Their union was proof's slow forge, love as the ultimate redemption, healing the Alpha's guilt through the Omega's sight, her rejection through his unwavering guard. The moon crested fully now, bathing the bloodied plain in silver absolution, the locket gleaming like a shared talisman against the night. Ilara leaned into him, the wind's sigh a benediction, her visions quiet at last, not curses, but revelations of strength in mercy's choice. Pacts would reform, borders redrawn, but in this fragile union they had transcended hierarchies, turning exile to alliance, despair to eternal flame. Yet the ethical whisper lingered. Was this cure complete, or merely the dawn of sacrifices yet to come? The goddess's light offered no answers, only the profound hush of souls reborn, where every wound became a step toward the divine. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.